Every morning for the past 20 years, Thomas Sheridan has eaten exactly the same meal, 2 slices of white toast with butter. No jam, no eggs, no tea, just toast. To most people, that might sound like a choice or maybe a quirky habit. But for Thomas, it's something much deeper. He's not on a diet. He's not trying a trend. He simply can't eat anything else. Living in Liverpool, Thomas's life has been shaped by a rare eating disorder so misunderstood that even doctors dismissed him for decades. Behind his quiet eyes is a story of confusion, isolation, and a body that violently rejects almost all food. Friends stopped inviting him out. He avoided family dinners. For years, he wondered, what's wrong with me? It wasn't until age 33 that he finally got an answer. Hit like, subscribe, and let's go. Thomas grew up like most kids in Liverpool. He went to a regular school, played football on the weekends, and spent hours watching old comedies with his dad. On the surface, everything seemed fine. But at mealtimes, something was always off. While other kids devoured spaghetti or tried their first burger, Thomas quietly pushed food around his plate. By the time he was a teenager, he was living almost entirely on toast and cereal. People said he was fussy or just stubborn. Even his parents thought he'd grow out of it. But he didn't. At work, he skipped office lunches. At weddings, he'd sit with an empty plate pretending he'd already eaten. Over the years, this small struggle quietly shaped every part of his daily life. He got used to saying no to invitations, to staying home instead. But deep down, he always wondered if something more serious was going on. It happened on a regular afternoon in early spring. Thomas had been invited to a small birthday gathering by a coworker, a rare invite he normally would have declined. But something that day made him say yes. Maybe he was tired of always being the one who stayed behind. The party was simple. Laughter, music, and a table full of homemade food. Plates of pasta, fresh salads, baked chicken. Nothing extreme, just regular food. But the moment Thomas stepped near the table, his chest tightened. The smell, the mix of textures, it was overwhelming. His hands trembled slightly and his stomach turned. He backed away quietly, hoping no one would notice. That night, lying in bed, he kept replaying the moment. Why did it feel so intense? Why did his body react like that? For the first time in years, he couldn't just brush it off. Something didn't feel right. Something was trying to tell him this wasn't normal. In the weeks after the party, small things started standing out. At the grocery store, Thomas would find himself avoiding entire aisles, not just out of habit, but because the smell of certain foods made him lightheaded. Walking past the deli section or bakery filled him with a strange, rising panic. One morning, he tried to eat a single bite of scrambled eggs, something he hadn't touched since childhood. Within seconds, his throat tightened and he rushed to the sink, gagging. It wasn't the taste. It was something deeper, like his body was rejecting the idea of unfamiliar food altogether. Even cereal, once a fallback when toast wasn't enough, began to feel wrong. The texture made his skin crawl. The milk made him nauseous. He started skipping meals more often, sticking only to plain toast with butter. Thomas didn't talk about it. Not yet. But quietly, he began to wonder, is this getting worse? One evening in late 2021, while scrolling through his phone, Thomas stumbled upon a short interview with a young woman from Canada. She described how she had lived for years eating only a handful of safe foods and how even the idea of trying something new caused panic. Her words echoed his own experiences almost exactly. The video mentioned something Thomas had never heard before: ARFID. Avoidant/Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. Not picky eating, not anxiety. A real, documented condition. That night, he fell into a rabbit hole of articles, forums, and stories from people just like him. For the first time, it all made sense. He wasn't weak or strange. His brain had been wired to see food not as nourishment but as a threat. The next morning, Thomas made an appointment with a specialist in Manchester. It was his first step toward answers and maybe finally towards something that looked like relief. At the clinic in Manchester, Thomas met with a psychologist who specialized in eating disorders. After a few sessions and careful evaluations, the diagnosis was clear: ARFID, and it had likely been shaping his life since early childhood. But what truly shook him wasn't the label, it was the health report that followed. Years of surviving almost entirely on toast and butter had left his body severely lacking in key nutrients. His iron levels were dangerously low, his bone density had started to decline, and his immune system was showing signs of long-term stress. The doctor gently explained that if nothing changed, Thomas could face serious complications in just a few years. It hit him hard. This wasn't just a social problem anymore. This was his life, his future. He felt a wave of guilt. Had he waited too long to act? And fear, what if it was already too late? By early 2022, Thomas stood at a quiet but critical crossroads. The specialist recommended an intensive food therapy program in London, a structured, months-long process that could slowly help retrain his brain and body to accept new foods. But it came with risks. There were no guarantees. Progress could be painfully slow. And worse, some patients dropped out, unable to cope with the emotional toll. He'd need to take time off work, dip into his limited savings, and face his biggest fear head-on, the unknown world beyond toast. Part of him wanted to retreat, to go back to the quiet routine he knew. But another part, growing louder, was tired of being ruled by fear. He stared at the open enrollment form on his laptop for hours. His hand hovered over the keyboard. Could he really do this? Could he face what he'd been avoiding his whole life? 2 weeks before the therapy program was set to begin, Thomas collapsed at work. It wasn't dramatic, just a sudden dizziness, a blurred room, and then darkness. The ER doctors found what his earlier tests had warned about: severe anemia and early signs of nutritional deficiency impacting his heart. He spent 2 nights in the hospital, hooked up to fluids, nurses quietly checking vitals. Lying there under harsh lights, Thomas felt the weight of it all: years of avoidance, silence, and shame crashing into one moment. For the first time, he truly feared for his life. Not in an abstract way. In a very real, very immediate way. But on the second night, something changed. A nurse, around his age, left a note on his bedside table: "It's not your fault. Just don't give up." And for the first time in years, Thomas didn't feel completely alone. After his release from the hospital, Thomas knew there was no going back. The fear was still there, but now it was matched by something stronger: determination. He enrolled in the therapy program in London and began the slow, uncomfortable process of reintroducing food. At first, it was just looking at new items, then touching them, smelling. Eventually, 1 bite, then 2. It wasn't easy. Some days he cried in frustration. Other days he celebrated what others would see as small wins, like eating a spoonful of plain rice or tasting a soft-boiled egg without panic. The therapists didn't rush him. They taught him how his brain had built these patterns and how, with time and patience, he could gently unlearn them. A year later, toast is still a part of Thomas's life. But now it's joined by other things. Small things, but real things. And for the first time, eating no longer feels like surviving. It feels like living. Today, Thomas still lives in Liverpool in that same modest apartment. His fridge isn't packed, but it holds more than butter and bread. Yogurt, bananas, sometimes even grilled chicken in small, careful portions. He still has setbacks, moments where fear creeps back in. But now he has tools. And more importantly, he has understanding. He goes out more often, says yes to dinners even if he just sips tea and talks. For him, that's progress. Real progress. He doesn't pretend to be cured, but he's no longer ashamed. Most people wouldn't guess his struggle just by looking at him. But that's the thing, so many of us are carrying quiet battles no one can see. Have you ever hidden something for so long you forgot what life felt like without it? Share your thoughts below. Someone out there might need to hear your story.